This is Create the Next from ProCFO Partners, where every week we explore strategies and ideas for financial management and growth to help today's businesses put their financial picture in context.
Welcome back to Create the Next. I'm Chris Bentliff, and Larry Bomback is with us today. And Larry, we're having a good conversation today around ERPs. And there's a lot, I think, that goes into selecting your ERP, but there's a lot that goes into updating or migrating or transitioning from or to. And I guess let's just start with kind of what's your position on what should the ERP be doing in your organization? Like, what's the simple sentence of what it should be doing for you?
Well, thanks so much for having me on this podcast today. To answer your question, I think the ERP should make your life easier. Just
great answer.
In a simple sentence. That's the purpose of it.
Yet so many of us struggle with it, or it becomes a technological or logistical or admin headache, or adoption is poor. We're using 2% of the features that we were sold on, or whatever. What should we be thinking about? So when it comes to this idea of should be making life easier, I don't know, is there criteria? Every industry is different, every business, but how should I be starting to look at that? Or what are the punch lists that I should start to make around what's the perfect ERP for me?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think you need to start with kind of what organization are you? Are you an organization that has an existing ERP and you're looking to change, or are you an organization that wants to start from scratch and get an ERP because you don't have one yet? And obviously, in the latter case, that's probably going to be for a brand new type of business for the most part, unless you're just sort of operating still on pen and pencil and in Excel files as a more established business. But let's just pretend that you have an ERP for the sake of argument. I think the first step in assessing whether you even should change ERPs is just understanding what your pain points are with the first system. What's wrong with it? Is it limiting scalability? Is it causing inefficiencies? Is it not making your life easier? Is it not integrating with some other tools? What I've found in my experience working with organizations is that a lot of folks think there's just kind of a magic wand that you can wave, and there's going to be this perfect ERP that's going to do everything that you pull off the shelf. Everything's going to be beautifully integrated. And that almost never happens. Usually, your existing ERP probably can solve the issues that you're identifying if you had better training on that system, or maybe you purchased some additional modules or enhancements. And I always encourage folks to go down that path first and explore that path first, because it's probably going to be less of an administrative burden and probably more cost effective if you look at your existing system. And the other reason I say this is that if you're still not getting the most out of your ERP system today, why do you think that moving to another ERP system is suddenly going to change culturally how you're going to operate as an organization, and suddenly everything's going to start working? So I would try to build in the cultural changes first at an organization before even thinking about the technological solution.
I'm so glad you hit on both of these things. And I totally agree with you that adoption needs to be sort of front and center. So let's unpack that a little bit. Why is that such a pain point? I have experience where I'm thinking about an organization where it was I'm going to say a seasoned sales force, and they were doing a lot of pen and paper and a lot of old school Excel, and that's what they liked and that's what they were used to, and please don't mess with it. And so the resistance was there to do something different or new. How do we overcome that cultural sort of barrier so that we even understand if this is the right tool for us, because we know our people are using it and they've identified these gaps? What do we do?
Yeah, well, I think you got to talk to those stakeholders. They're going to probably be across various departments. I don't think it's just your sales team that's going to be impacted by an ERP migration or just the introduction of a new ERP. And I think you need, if you're the one leading the charge, and oftentimes it might be the CFO or the COO or the IT director of sort of larger organizations that might be leading this charge, they're probably best to just begin by doing a listening tour, understanding the workflows of all these different stakeholders, what their challenges are, and really get them to think about those pain points. And I'm probably going to use that term a lot over the course of this podcast. What are the things about working in Excel, for example, that are annoying, that are burdensome, that are repetitive, redundant, whatever those things are. And then once you've identified those pain points, then start dreaming with the stakeholder. In an ideal system, what would be a need to have and what would be a nice to have? There's going to be some stuff that's going to be obviously non-negotiable when you're looking for a new ERP. Identify those first. I put those in one bucket as the must-haves, and then or the needs, and then the other bucket, the sort of nice to haves. And I would do that across all the stakeholder groups, because what you'll inevitably find is that despite the fact that these folks sometimes operate in silos, they probably share a lot of the same pain points. They might be using different language to describe those pain points, but you'll see when you have these columns of must-haves and nice-to-haves and pain points that there's probably a lot of overlap. But that's a great way of just starting the whole stakeholder buy-in process.
That is great advice. And you mentioned sort of, who might be quarterbacking this or who might be leading this. Do you recommend that we kind of, if we're this sort of organization, that we put a small team together to sort of start to evaluate this or start to analyze this? Or is there a single person that should kind of be like the evaluator of these things? I'm thinking about how do we sort of aggregate this information in a responsible and efficient way so that then we can do something with it.
Yeah. I mean, I think in the case of an ERP, someone either in accounting or in sales ideally would be leading the charge. And I think that really depends on who in the organization among those two has the time, the energy, the expertise, and then ultimately the sort of goals of the organization. I think if you're an organization that's in growth mode, maybe having somebody in sales be the leader of the process. But if you're in an organization that kind of needs to hunker down and is in maybe more of a turnaround situation, you want to let finance drive so that they can keep an eye on the expense side. But regardless, I think when you're putting together a new system like this, assuming you have assuming you're a small business, but with maybe at least 20 employees, let's say, you want to have a dedicated project team that's formed for the purposes of moving this project forward and getting it to the finish line. So I think if your organization has a CFO, whether that's a full-time person or a fractional person, that person should absolutely be involved in the process. Whether they're leading the charge or not, they should be on that team. Somebody from IT, and that might be someone you have in-house, or sometimes a lot of small businesses use consultants for IT, but somebody from IT needs to be there as well to understand all that back-end stuff that's required to get an ERP up and running, especially from a cybersecurity and risk standpoint. And then lastly, I think it's always really important to involve anybody who oversees a budget at your organization to be involved in that. Some organizations, not everybody is overseeing the budget. It might just be the founder or the CEO who's overseeing the whole enterprise. But as organizations start to grow, individual department or division budgets might develop. And the folks who are ultimately accountable for those budgets should absolutely be involved in this process, because they're going to be the folks, whether you realize it or not, they might not be entering so much data into the system, but they're certainly going to be asking for a lot of information to come out of the system. So get those involved, get those folks involved.
Fantastic advice. I love when we're able to get like, if this, then that. That's fantastic. So now I've got kind of my wish list or my need to have and my nice to have. Do I start evaluating opportunities for a different or a new ERP? Am I thinking like, growth mode 10 years down the road, this should have every single thing possible, even if we might not use it, because down the road we will, because that's kind of what we'll be sold on. Like, and when you get there, this or that, or these integrations, or should I be like, I just need the thing that is small and lean and fast and efficient for these things right now, and we'll deal with what we deal with later on. Like, how do I start to think about the future or the present tense with this?
Yeah, obviously, I think any organization that's growth oriented needs to be thinking about the future, but you need to be thinking about your own future and not the future of the product that you're buying. I've had too many experiences with salespeople at various ERP and CRM situations where they say, yes, we're going to have that feature, but it's on our product roadmap and it'll be available in X number of years. And then it's X number of years later after you've bought the product and it still doesn't exist, or they've taken it off the product roadmap because they believe it's not going to be profitable anymore. understanding, I would say anything a salesperson tells you from an ERP or CRM company about something that's coming down the pike in, a year from now or more, just assume that the product does not have that and might not ever have that, because you shouldn't be buying or moving to a new system based on a future promise. What can the product deliver to you today? The way I start these processes when I do these with groups of stakeholders at an organization is we have that nice to have, need to have matrix. The nice to have, need to have list of criteria, but then we create a matrix of what the ideal system might have, and it would have all of those needs to haves and nice to haves. And the need to haves should be weighted more heavily than the nice to haves. The matrix should be a weighted matrix. So let's say, the categories in the nice to haves, if one of the ERP systems that you're looking at has that, great, that's 1 point. But if they have one of the need to haves, then that's 2 points. That's just a simple way of showing that we are prioritizing what's absolutely essential for the system. And then, of course, determining what those criteria are on the matrix is something that comes out of that stakeholder engagement process. So very typical ones are like integration with this other system that's really critical to our business. Price is obviously another one. Not just the ongoing price, but what's the startup price? Another criteria might be, training and professional development on the system. So there's all those different items that can be on the matrix, but understanding what are the really essential ones and what are the nice to haves.
You mentioned, we kind of talked about sort of a cultural aptitude with some of this. I think that there can sometimes be a sensibility of, we put this team together, we built the list, we put the matrix, we did this, we were so thoughtful, we had 18 demos come in. It can feel like a humongous project. And then we did a big training for everybody. And when that was done, so this whole thing took us 9 months and it's over, everybody. Good job. We have the ERP. There can be less emphasis on continued training. There can be less emphasis on, now that you know this, you're prepared to know that. And it can be hard to keep the team or your organization engaged so that you aren't bumping into these same problems and you're not doing a sort of fact-finding mission 3 years from now because people aren't using it. What do we do? How do we solve that?
Yeah, so I am not a fan of a big comprehensive training where we say, everybody on the staff, come over here on this day. We're going to spend 4 hours and we're all going to learn it. This is where I think the power of that ad hoc team that we put together at the beginning can really play a great role. Their job is not done when they've identified the system. They actually, in phase 2 of this ad hoc committee, let's say phase 1 was getting to the point where you implement the system, or at least you've identified what the system is. In phase 2, that group on the ad hoc team needs to become the trainers. So I believe very much in a train the trainer type program. Let the product or the software company train that small group first, and then have that small group, which represents ideally a diverse group of stakeholders at your organization, maybe all the budget managers, somebody from sales, somebody from finance, et cetera. Let those folks have a really good grasp of the system, and then they can train in smaller groups with their particular stakeholders that they know the most about and how those folks actually interact with this system. Comprehensive trainings are often just everything in the kitchen sink, and it's not going to, and the information that you get in there is not going to apply to everyone. But there might be a little thing in there that's very, very important to one part of the company. And that's an area where a train the trainer model can allow folks to do a really big deep dive.
That's a fantastic idea, especially in maybe smaller organizations where it seems like one person becomes like the expert, and now you've introduced a risk if that person leaves or whatever, or it gets relegated to IT or somebody who doesn't necessarily understand the nuances of what sales or admin or whatever. Yeah. I love this idea of spreading that out. So how do I rely on more than just the salespeople who are going to come in and blow my mind with how amazing this is? But as you pointed out, I have to sort of watch out for things. How do I find what's right for me, taking different inputs in so that I'm making a well-educated sort of informed decision, and I'm not just leaning on, that was a cool demo, look at all the things we could do. Maybe I would be missing something on something else. What do I do to kind of have a broader perspective?
Yeah, so I love salespeople. They're critical to any organization. They're the
Agreed.
ones who bring the revenue. However, I do not want to receive a demo from a salesperson because they actually probably don't know the real nuts and bolts of the system, and they have a surface level script that they need to go through in order to close. So demos absolutely have to be part of the search process, and you use those demos to ultimately fill in your matrix with all those criteria that are either essential or nice to haves. But on those demos, I would insist, if I was an organization looking at a particular product, I would insist that, sure, the salesperson can be there, but I don't want the salesperson leading the demo. I actually want someone from their tech side leading the demo so that they can truly answer the specific questions that the individual stakeholders will have at a very granular level rather than a more surface level that a salesperson might. And again, this is nothing against salespeople. They're the most important,
Right.
they're arguably the most important person to any business because they're the ones bringing in the revenue. But when it comes to the actual implementation of a new technology system, having a technologist on the other side giving you that demo, I think is essential. Once you've identified a system and you have that ad hoc team of your internal stakeholders, I would also insist that added to that team is a dedicated technologist from the software company that is dedicated to your team, works with you, and is guiding you and handholding you all the way through that point where they are going to be training you on the system so that we can get to that train the trainer situation that I described earlier.
Is your guidance, again, everybody's different, broad strokes don't really work, but is your guidance sort of, is that a go, no go? So if you're talking to somebody and you're like, look, these are some of the things we want to do. We want to make sure that this person's in our demo and this person's on our team. And if that organization pushes back and says, that's not really how we do things, is that a way to say, cool, shake hands, wish you well, but you're not for us?
For me personally, yes, that's a bad sign. For me personally, just in my own experience, I'm sure there are a million examples where that has not been the case for others. But the time when a salesperson needs to be, the time when you have the most leverage in any of these types of interactions is before you've actually committed to buying something. So if they're not even giving you what you want when you're in that sales part of the cycle, where you're the potential buyer of the product, and if they're not giving you those answers now, why in the world do you think they'd be helpful once you've been transferred over to an account executive and you're no longer in the sales funnel? So that's usually a no-go for me.
How should I think about this in terms of sort of scope? Should I be, let's say I'm listening to this today and I'm thinking, you know what, we got to prioritize this for like January 1. Am I going to spend all of 2025 on this and maybe by December I'll be up and running? Should I be spending 6 months? Obviously, again, everybody's different, but would you have some thresholds in mind for like, look, expect this. It's probably going to take that. Just to find your resource might take this. Like, how should we start to plan for this?
Yeah, I think the only ERP system that could probably be done in 6 months is something as simple as like QuickBooks at an organization. It really is a wonderful out of the box piece of software and can can absolutely be implemented very quickly. I think anything more advanced than QuickBooks, you need to be looking more into the 12 to 18 months timeline. So if your goal is in 2025 to have a new ERP, I would say maybe hold your horses. Give yourself, maybe it's better to underpromise and overdeliver in this particular case, and give yourself through at least the middle of 2026. I think you'll find during the discovery process that your organization may be more complex than you even thought it was, as you start to figure out how this system is going to work best for you.
Is it valuable to have an outside consultant who this is their expertise? I help people figure out all the things we've been talking about. Is that valuable to have that person come in and sort of drive these things and make sure the check boxes are being hit? Or it's just somebody, like yourself who has expertise in this realm and has experience in this realm? Who else should I be bringing onto my team that might be outside of who I'm ready to grab on board because they're here?
Yeah, I have no problem with organizations bringing in consultants. I just think the one caveat is you should be aware that consultants probably do have some inherent biases towards particular systems that they're most familiar with. I sort of gave away my bias just now with a system like QuickBooks. I mean, I would recommend any organization that has less than $10 million of revenues to be using QuickBooks. I'm always shocked when I see any organization with less than $10 million of revenues using QuickBooks. So I come in with that bias. So as long as you bring in a consultant who can really go in agnostic and can be very impartial throughout the discovery process, I think it's a great idea. One thing that's wonderful about a consultant is that they're the ones who will make sure the process keeps moving and gets finished on the appropriate timeline that you've established. If you're an employee of a company, you have your day-to-day tasks to do, and it's very, very easy to get pulled away because some new fire has sprung up, and you got to put that out. And then a project like this can take a back seat. So I have no problem with a consultant being involved. I just would caution folks to, when you're interviewing consultants, make sure that they can do this in a very impartial way.
Larry Bomback is a pro CFO at ProCFO Partners and is a genius. And you've kind of given us this amazing guide to the ERP, and it's just fantastic. And we'll write this up so that, there will be a lot here for folks to be able to reference and look at and sort of, pull apart, and obviously reach out if there's more to discuss or questions to have on this. Larry, I'm sure would be excited to talk to you. Larry, thank you so much for this conversation and for sharing all of your insights and wisdom. It's been fantastic. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Chris. This was great.
Thanks for watching, and a special thanks to our subscribers. Consider becoming one today. Visit ProCFOPartners.com for more strategies and ideas for financial management and growth to help you put your business's financial picture in context.